Hello, welcome to Exploring Sunday Scriptures. It is June the 25th, 2024. These are the scriptures associated with this coming Sunday, June the 30th, 2024, where we will have a guest preacher, Dr. David Pliss. Been with us many times in the past, will be with us this week with a sermon entitled Gospel Dreams. These are the scriptures he has chosen to go with that focus, and I will share them with you. If I have thoughts, I certainly will share those as well, but at least wanted to give you some exposure to these scriptures. So this is the order in which he has asked for them to be read. And it begins with the Gospel of Luke in the 20th chapter, verses 27 through 36. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. The him here is Jesus. Came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. It's an interesting passage that David is beginning with here. So the Sadducees, experts in religious law, and the top so the Sadducees were at the top, the Pharisees below them, the scribes beneath them, as far as the religious hierarchy of the temple. The Sadducees coming to Jesus with this legal question that they already knew the answer to, and it has to do with the law as prescribed by Moses. And now it says at the forefront that these particular Sadducees were those who did not believe in the resurrection, who say there is no resurrection. So they came to Jesus and they say, what the law says is that if a man's brother dies, I have 2 brothers, so if one of my brothers dies and he has left behind a wife and I am unmarried but no children, then according to the law, I am to marry the widow, the wife. And they then continued to tease this out in saying that there were 7 brothers. And so you kind of go from the eldest to the youngest. The eldest marries, he dies. The second eldest then marries the widow, etc., all down to the 7th, who also dies. And then finally the woman dies childless. So the childless is an important aspect of also this. Is that children are what become heirs to the property. And if there are no children, that's why there is this ongoing legacy, that the brother and the family's legacy continues with children. And so why the widow is married until there be children. But in this case, there are no children at all. So they're trying to catch him up in a question. So they don't believe in resurrection, about resurrection, by using this really kind of odd example. In the resurrection, so that's when we're raised from the dead, whose wife will the woman be? Because she's married 7 times. They've all been husbands to her. And so they're saying, okay, we come back from the dead, so who is she in a relationship with? Who is she married to? Because 7 had been married to her. And we have Jesus give a response which has to do with this age, those who belong to this age. So those who are invested in right now, are invested in themselves, are anchored in the earth, go about the business of the earth. They're concerned with this kind of law, being married and given in marriage. But as Jesus says, those who believe in the resurrection, those who belong in the age to come, don't marry or are given in marriage. Now, this is not a prescription of saying that Christians should not marry. It's looking at the covenant of marriage being something that is bound for all time, even though it is an earthly institution. Now, when we go about a wedding ceremony, this is very interesting. What we say, what God has joined together, let no one put asunder. So we mark it as a covenant, which is different than simply a pact or an agreement, but something that also includes God in it. And so this can be a little bit of a struggle to think of the fact that Jesus doesn't seem to be endorsing marriage here. He's really just trying to make them and their question, to look in a mirror and see how ridiculous their question is. However, it is this comment that led to ideas that still persist in Catholicism and other expressions of Christianity, that those who are truly invested in their faith or are set apart in ministry should not marry. So, those who believe in the resurrection neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they can't die because they're like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. Now, what this also says is that our marriages, we think of death here, an end. These are Sadducees who don't believe that there is anything after that end. And Jesus is saying there is no end, so therefore the covenant remains for all time, at the same time that he says they don't marry in this way. Let me shift, because there's lots of scriptures here, to the next one. This is simply the 19th verse of Galatians chapter 4. And there it reads, "My little children, for whom I am again in the pain of childbirth until Christ is formed in you." This is Paul writing to the church in Galatia. He often refers to his churches, or those of the church, as children, and he as the one that is nursing them, or nurturing them into being, into spiritual being. And so he uses this illustration of the pain of childbirth in the sense of you're being brought forth into your spiritual life, and this is a painful experience to move away from the life that you have known before. And Paul, as the one who is bearing them, bears this pain of how challenging it is to turn from those ways that were before, until it is that they mature, until, as it says in the scripture, Christ is formed in you. The next scripture is another single verse, Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. And there it's, "I'm confident of this, that the one who began a good work in you will continue to complete it until the day of Jesus Christ." So here we again have Paul writing, and we kind of sense that way of moving from Galatians in the pain of childbirth until Christ is formed, into the one who began a good work. So what was started in that birth will continue, will mature it until the day of Jesus Christ, until that day that Christ returns. Now, Gospel Dreams is the name of the sermon, so bear that in mind as you think about the three scriptures we've already heard. This is the final scripture for this particular Sunday. And it comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. And this is what it reads there. "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I've come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, this is a great challenge because there's always this debate about what Christians should look like. Jesus was a first century Palestinian Jew. He followed things like a kosher diet. Should Christians, if we follow Jesus? Well, here in Matthew's gospel, we have Jesus saying things such as, "I didn't come to abolish the law of the prophets, but to fulfill them." Now, this is both a sense of his own embodiment of them, but he also says that there should be a following of them. Does this mean that we should be following all of the Levitical law that exists in the Bible. Now, this might come down to a theological question, because one of the things that Jesus says in this passage is, I've come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter. So there are some theologians that have gone through this argument that the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven, started with the resurrection of Jesus. And therefore, the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, as Jesus himself purports to, happens or is inaugurated with the resurrection. So you could say the end of it was in crucifixion. The new law begins with the resurrection. Or in the case of how this scripture is written, until heaven and earth pass away. So until this first expression of it dies, so there's the crucifixion and is entombed. Only then can something new rise out of that. So we have this sort of competing reality. Is Jesus saying here, maintain the law, and is that what we are supposed to do? Or is Jesus hinting here early in Matthew's gospel about what will be the reality come resurrection? And until that time, Jesus is saying, no, you should be following all the things that you know to be true until it's all accomplished. And that you shouldn't be breaking them. That's not right. In fact, we should be even more righteous and holy and good than the scribes and the Pharisees that are here. Now, what David is going to do with all of these scriptures and how this comes into gospel dreaming, I'm uncertain. I am very curious, and I certainly will be listening to his sermon to see how he weaves these together. And I pray that you may give the same kind of thought. Gospel dreams. How does this allude to gospel dreaming? And where is David going to take us on this journey through these scriptures? I hope you might return to them one or two more times before worship on Sunday to gain some more appreciation for what they say. And then when it is proclaimed, you'll easily be able to recall the words of that scripture. Always a joy to share with you these times of exploring Sunday scriptures. We have suspended briefly our meeting in person, but I have every ambition of making sure that we continue these online opportunities uninterrupted, hopefully throughout the summer. So hopefully I'll be back with you again next week for our next installment of Exploring Sunday's Scriptures.